How's it going? Hey. As much as I hate this, I'm back doing it again tonight. Thank you so much for coming out to the Thursday night edition for the Real Matter Workshop. We are so glad you came out. We're in for a real treat tonight. We have Emily and Mary from Assemble in the UK. They've been with us all week, listening to our conversations, participating, getting in fights with council members, things like that. It's been great. So we're really excited to hear from them tonight. Before I introduce our sponsor for tonight, I did want to take a chance to mention again our awesome cohort who are here in the front. Can you please stand? This is going to happen every night, I promise. They traveled here from, if you haven't been here for any of the other nights, they traveled here from all over the country and dedicated the last 2 weeks of their summer to listen to the series, be a part of the conversations in Raleigh, and then help us problem solve through some of the stressors that we experience day in and day out living here in Raleigh. So thank you all for your commitment. We've had a blast having you here, and it's going to be a great coming week. With that, I want to introduce our lecture sponsor for tonight. Tonight's sponsors, Ratio Architects, and we have Brooke here who's going to introduce the ladies from Assemble. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Hello. As Zach mentioned, I'm with Ratio Design, and we connect people and place to shape environments of purpose, beauty, and meaning. And we do that through a group of interdisciplinary, inspired, engaged individuals. And locally, we have been really involved in the last few years in the East Civic Campus, which was a partnership with Henning Larson, the new City Hall. We currently have a team that are working with TVS as well on the Convention Center expansion and Red Hat Amphitheater. We recently revitalized Coastal Credit Union's headquarters facility. And we love our Southeast Raleigh YMCA and also many recent projects with the Wake County Public Schools educational projects. But what I'm excited to be inspired by, as I'm sure most of you are as well tonight, is to really get a sense from this dynamic duo, Emily Wickham and Mary Anderson of Assemble Studio of London, of how they go about creating change in small incremental ways in the face of what might seem like a long process of bringing people around to the resistance that may come with that change. And what I initially found upon a quick perusal of their website was that they not only apply careful and rigorous design, but they advocate for play. And they're part of a 20-person collective of peers, which I think is also going to be interesting to hear about. But they participate in guerrilla design moments as a way to bait whoever they're working for in that change process. So I think we heard on Sunday night was it, that some things take decades to get seen through, and so I think each of us that are having an effect on this community might have something to take away in these smaller bites of change. So without further ado, Emily and Mary.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a designer at Assemble. It's really brilliant to be here, to meet everyone at In Situ and hear some really amazing speakers and find out a bit about Raleigh and just be a part of what's going on. It's been a really, really great week.
Yeah, and I'm Mary, also a partner at Assemble, and yeah, it's been good to be here for a long enough time to be able to explore a bit, see the city, but also further afield, drive around on the huge highways on the other side of the road. But yeah.
We didn't crash.
We did not crash. So, Assemble. There are currently 18 people working as part of Assemble. This is us. I could name everyone, but I won't. Assemble is a London-based organisation who design and make buildings, artworks, gardens, playgrounds, furniture, exhibitions and events. We develop business plans, project strategies and create organisations. We design, construct and manage workspaces. We curate, teach, write books, publish research and lecture publicly. And each of these activities form an interconnected body of work. And we use design as a tool to respond to the environmental, social and economic challenges we face today. And we believe that built examples, along with critical reflection, are the most effective means to have a positive impact. So, Assemble aspires to apply careful and rigorous design, preserve industrial spaces in the city, defend public and cultural spaces, celebrate craft and material knowledge, actively engage with the land and its communities, and advocate for play. And I'm going to hand over to Emily to talk a little bit about workspace, which is an important part of how we work.
Yeah, so as well as being a design firm, we also run Workspace, which is a kind of integral part of how we operate. Within Assemble, there's a broad range of skills and experience, and our interest in the crossover between different disciplines is also reflected in the places that we work and the workspaces that we run. So we're a workspace provider for designers, fabricators, and artists. We design, build, and manage workspace and shared workshop facilities with the aim to enable and support collaboration across disciplines. Alongside our design practice, we're passionate about having spaces in the city for people to make things. And being a workspace provider allows us and others to do this together. So our design studio is, physically sits as part of the workspace that we run. So we can work in our office alongside a variety of practitioners, from graphic designers to carpenters to metalworkers, ceramic artists, music studios. The individual studio spaces are organised around a core of common facilities that enable and support co-working and collaboration. We've moved around London a lot in terms of our own studio spaces, tapping into meanwhile leases on buildings. I don't know if you have that here. Sites that are basically waiting to be developed into more permanent buildings. So finding a place to work in a city like London is incredibly expensive and difficult, particularly if you have or you want to have a lot of stuff, even more so if you want to make a lot of stuff, which is really what this business and the business of most of our collaborators is about. So you're likely to find yourself on the periphery of the city in vacant lots, places earmarked for demolition or for development. And you often hear this word in London, meanwhile use. It's much cheaper to find larger sites like this that are stuck in a kind of development limbo. And the idea is to do the work to make the most out of this space while you have it before it gets developed. So that might mean building something on it, making it functionable, so insulate it if you can, doing a minimal fit out, and then bringing a crowd along with you so that the financial burden is divided. And then everyone can benefit from the collective use of machinery, tools, and space. So this is a photo of one of our earlier projects, Yard House, the first piece of workspace that we set up in an area of London called Stratford on our first site. And here it is from the outside. And it didn't last forever. And so in 2016, we vacated to make way for the residential development to be built. So we're now operating from our third location, but there's a common theme in how the studio and workshops are set up. So we like to have a yard to make messy work and to collaborate with other people who use the space. We have a front of house space that in all of our workshops, and it's very important to how we work. So we use it. You can see from this picture, we use it as a space for all sorts of things, to document work, to test mock-ups. In the background, there's a kind of a one-to-one fragment of a building, as well as doing a photography session. and model making and storage. But the primary function is that it can be used by all of the tenants in the building through a booking system. So, you know, sometimes we're using it, but sometimes you'll find people, one of the carpenters working on a beautiful piece of joinery like this, which has nothing to do with our work. But, you know, we get to see this, and this kind of space in the workspace represents what's happening in the wider community that's occupying the building. And the fact that you would walk through this space, often to get to your own workspace, really helps to then strike up conversations, open dialogue, and it's a platform to share ideas. And so this kind of brings me nicely to just to talk about our collective process and how we run Assemble. Because, you know, originally it started as a group of friends, and over the years it's morphed in various ways, various different ways of running itself. And a lot of our work actually goes into figuring out how we run ourselves in what we try to maintain as a non-hierarchical structure. So today we've sort of professionalized. So we're an LLP structure and limited liability partnership. And under that we have 3 different companies: Assemble Design Limited, the Blue Hats, Sugar House Studios, the Red Hats, which is the workspace, and Standard and General Construction, which is the internal construction company that we use to build projects ourselves. And the way we run is that management sits in between everything, and management is spread across partners in Assemble, new and old, who want to take on a role alongside their practice, and that includes things like HR, project management, finance. So, you know, an example of how this might work is that James is a design employee and an Assemble Industries partner. Alice is a Assemble Design employee, an Assemble Industries partner, and on the management team. And Louis is an Assemble Design employee and an Assemble Workspace director. So it's all kind of shared out, but everybody knows what their role is. And so in order to, you know, run non-hierarchically, we have to try to make decisions collectively. And this can take time, but I think people believe in doing it and believe that some of the non-efficiencies of doing this are sort of worth it. And we have various ways of trying to do this, from, you know, more informal things like lunch, where one person cooks lunch for everyone and we all sit down together, to things like the new work meeting. So this is a discussion about new work with the whole office, the opportunities that come in, and it's discussed with everyone to get a sense of who's interested in pursuing the projects, and then we vote on what we want to do. So you know, lunch, for example, is one of the longest running projects in Assemble. Something we take very seriously. Can get elaborate with some homemade barbecues. And we always eat together. You know, when guests come, they join our lunches. It's effective networking. It's a really good way of introducing people to the way we work. But also, you know, it's for everyone in the office to pause and share and make decisions as a group. And
I'm going to talk about Cineroleum, which was the formative project of Assemble. It was a self-initiated project from 2010 that transformed a petrol station on Clerkenwell Road into a cinema. And Clerkenwell Road is one of the busiest 2-lane roads in London. And the project, it took on a site that was due for redevelopment, so as Emily was saying, a meanwhile site, and it had been left dormant following the 2008 financial crash. So at that time, lots of developments were stalling, and there was suddenly a lot of empty space in London, and that was a symptom of the economic recession, which provided an opportunity to experiment. And this has really continued to be a source of opportunity for Assemble ever since this condition. But yeah, so the project relied on resourcefulness. It was it included reaching out for sponsorship, but also working with over 100 volunteers. So this is an image of people making the flip-up cinema seats, which were made from scaffold boards. And to facilitate that communal making, it took a bit of preparation. So these drawings were created to make essentially an IKEA kit for some simple seats that could be made on site by whoever passed by. And I guess the intention for that really led the design of the seats, the fact that the main brief was to be easy to make. And yeah, so these were kind of illustrated manuals which people could just get involved and participate in the construction. But the cinema itself was made from readily available, cheap, reclaimed or donated materials, and these included scaffold boards and Tyvek roofing membrane, which were brought together to resemble the familiar and glamorous signifiers of like Art Deco cinema. And you can see in this picture there are a few very plush red seats which were donated by the local cinema museum. So yeah, it was really a lot about building relationships with people, so that people were invested in this project. And it was also a lot about making things by hand. So this is the ruffled curtain that was made, which was the sort of external envelope of the petrol station added on. And that was probably the kind of biggest dramatic gesture of the project, because it has this kind of silver finish, and it was created by hand sewing 3 kilometers of seam into the curtain system. But it meant that you could pull it up, and it had this sense of movement. And one of the films that was played in this program was Jewel, which was quite fitting because it was right next to this really busy road, and you only the membrane, this Tyvek roofing membrane, was separating you from that, so you could probably still hear the lorries outside as you were watching it anyway. Kind of added to the immersive nature of it all. Yeah, and then when you got to the end of the film, the curtain comes up and you're in the road anyway. But yeah, so it was kind of both a performance for people inside the cinema, but also for people passing by. And it was also, yeah, it kind of was, when there was all these kind of empty lots of land in London, there was a bit of a trend of suddenly pop-up. That was a new thing, really. And yeah, so, but also aside from it being a cinema, the Cinerolium was a place of participatory construction, which, so it had a kind of social value aside from sitting together and watching a film. And it also brought some sort of collective learnings. So it didn't need to be finished to provide a social space. And so that it was very much a work in progress, but also serving a purpose. And the making process had been the whole way through very open and very visible to the public. There wasn't hoarding up, it was right there. And this seemed interesting. And it brought the kind of notion that we continue on with now, that you can activate a site before it's finished. And yeah, so some of the collective learnings that came from that is that something can happen when you get lots of people together, that it's possible to make decisions when no one is in charge, and that the outcome is likely, if not certainly, going to be different than what you thought it would be, because you're working with lots of different visions. And now I'm going to jump ahead 15 years, well, slightly less, to another project that I think has some kind of transferable ideas from Cinerolium, at the Dream Machine. So we worked on this between 2020 and 22, so in the thick of COVID-19. And it has some similarities to Cinerolium in its experimental and temporary nature, and working with collaborative and theatrical principles. So Dream Machine, so differently to Cinerolium, Dream Machine was a government-funded public art commission, which doesn't happen very often. And it was for this festival called Unboxed Festival, and it toured the UK from May to September in 4 different cities in the UK, starting with London and Cardiff, and then Edinburgh and Belfast. And it's quite difficult to explain, but it is an immersive, multi-sensory art experience that uses flickering light directed at a particular distance and frequency onto your closed eyes to create a kaleidoscopic visual phenomena, all generated by your own brain. And the idea for Dream Machine came from the Beat Generation artist and poet Brian Gysin in the 1950s. And he sort of landed on this phenomena when he was riding a bus that was traveling through a forest when the sun was low in the sky and the tree trunks were interrupting the light shining on his eyelids at the frequency that the bus was driving. And in this moment, as he was falling asleep against the window, he experienced a phenomena of vivid kaleidoscopic visuals with his eyes closed. And I sort of think I had this feeling when I've been in a car driving along and there's like some sort of slatted fence that you're going past and there's sun coming through it, and you see something more than just what's going on outside when your eyes are closed. But yeah, and he wanted to recreate this experience and did so by making this tabletop device in this picture. And it was essentially a cylinder with slots cut into it. And then the paper cylinder is attached to a record player with a light bulb in the middle. And then you press play, and the cylinder turns around, and you get this flickering light. And you, as these 2 gentlemen here are doing, you stand up close to it with your eyes closed, and this kaleidoscopic phenomena happens, which I can't show you. Sorry. But yeah, so however many years later, Assemble are approached by the arts producer Jen Crook to turn that very individual experience into something that can be experienced by a collective. And so us, Assemble, the collective, were asked to design its environment. And we worked for around 18 months collaboratively with a multidisciplinary team of neuroscientists, technologists, the musician John Hopkins, arts and theatre producers, fabricators, structural engineers, and textile designers to develop a kit of demountable structures to tour the UK. And the project was both a public art piece and an opportunity for neuroscientific research, where neuroscientists were also exploring and trying to kind of gather more data about this phenomena, which has been explored in very kind of specific lab conditions, but never with lots of people going through that. So that was quite a tricky brief, actually, to be where I guess when we think of an art experience that you don't want to be imposing anything on anyone, you want it to feel very kind of, not a kind of lab condition, but so there was sort of a desire to gather data, but also for this to be a very chosen experience by whoever goes in there. So that was our brief. And I guess that led to our intent being we wanted to create an experience that can facilitate the unknown and not yet conceived thoughts, feelings, and impressions. So to go somewhere new, but feel safe in the making. So this was our design, or conceptual diagram. And I think our kind of first intent is to do that, is in an architectural form of like basically going through layers. So you have gentle transitions from the kind of outside world to this new cerebral experience. And so there's some kind of memorable navigation. But yeah, as I mentioned, it was a very big team, and it was during COVID, so it was all online most of the time, apart from these kind of some moments where it was loose. It was, later in the process where we could get together and do model workshops. But so the design process was very collaborative, which was particularly beneficial to this project because it highlighted all our different perceptions of what we thought it should be. And because it felt like the project was exploring diversity in human perception. So if there was just one designer designing this thing for all these people, that just didn't really feel right. So it felt right that there were lots of voices involved in how this thing should be and look. Oh, cool. Don't know. Have I done something?
Maybe click the next slide.
Maybe it just doesn't like that one. No, it doesn't like any of it.
Should we unplug and plug it in?
That'll turn it off and on again.
Oh,
No.
it's sort of back. We might need a helper. I'll try this. I'll try this plug. It's good to have a breather.
Yeah.
Resetting the splitter.
Okay. Need a visual. This is actually very similar to what you see in the Dream Machine. Yeah, honestly.
We don't need any slides. Oh, here we go.
Yay! Yeah. So, I'll speed up. Yeah, so I guess the one point just to make is that when you're working with a big team, multidisciplinary team, we just found that models and prototypes and physical versions of what you're making is the best way to do it, because 2D architectural drawings just, they're very fixed and not everyone can read them immediately unless you've had lots of training, or maybe you can, but people perceive things in different ways when they're quite abstract. And also just having something like this 1 to 20 model that is kind of like a war game, like you can move everything around, and yeah, it's flexible. But yeah, so we had these 1 to 20 models, but then we also built 1-to-1 prototypes of the space, and this really meant that we could get lots of focus groups through our prototype, but sort of testing certain. This is a prototype of the seating and sitting in the round, and yes, the point was to not do a prototype with all the colours and finishes. It was really stripped back and testing the arrangement and how people experience the flow, but that it's stripped back enough to not kind of put too much bias in that way. And these prototypes went from the arrangement, but also to like very specific explorations of angle of your lumbar support. And our role really was to design the whole journey, which included the transition from the outside on the street, in public, busy, everyday life, into a much more internalized experience. So the journey started at a point where you left the outdoor world behind you, entered into the core of the dream machine where this audio visual experience would take place, and then you follow that experience through into another space of reflection. And this is where we facilitated sort of different scales of conversation with loose furniture, where people can come together and reflect or share their experiences. But yeah, a lot of the design discussions really revolved around diameters, and thinking about what scale of round was appropriate for different parts of this journey. Because also, yeah, we didn't really know what venues this was going to be in, so it had to be a kit of parts that could be arranged in different ways and tightnesses depending on where it would end up. And yeah, and kind of being in the round was a design logic that was established very early on in the project, actually, just for kind of an experience of feeling as democratic as possible. So it's not like a kind of tiered seating where someone has a better view than the other. And this probably, I guess, part of the process was just references. And this is from Dr. Strangelove, which you might recognize. And just the fact that you could have a very kind of collective experience, but also smaller, intimate conversations in that same formation. And this kind of fed into the furniture, things like the drawing table, where after you have this audiovisual experience, you go and you have the opportunity to draw all what you saw. And then I guess also another part of the design was color, because we wanted any of the kind of boundaries to not feel too hard. And so color was quite a good way of achieving that. Using color to kind of hold people and define an environment, and that could be in sort of different tones depending on what material you were using. And kind of, yeah, so sort of using color to not be a concrete constraint. And kind of landed on wanting color to be quite grounding, so things like dawn and dusk, when and there's obviously such a huge variety within those things. And yeah, and finding other ways that you could feel grounded in going through something like that. And we had a lot of discussions with the textile designer who designed this bespoke fabric, which was somewhere between the kind of London Underground seats, but maybe also kind of moss on the floor. And that, yeah, color but also texture coming through in the timber staining. So this was the core that you go into, which was, it all had to be designed a bit like a circus. Like it had to be put up for 2 weeks, taken down, shipped off to the next city. And it was done so to sort of look really solid, but actually done with kind of rented aluminium trussing. But yeah, it was a very kind of, the production and timelines and schedules are probably the hardest thing of this project, because all the kind of venues were changing all the time, and they were the hardest thing to pin down up in this project. And that's, I guess, particularly in places like London, and it's very reflective of the land market in the city. But yeah, also just finding spaces that are big enough to host large quantities of people, and usually the ones that we could find are essentially falling into disrepair. So that also sat as quite an interesting contrast of context. So we had an old market in Woolwich in London. This old deconsecrated church in Belfast that had been, deconsecrated because it had been a Catholic church that had been built for a congregation of 1,000 people, but because of its location in the Troubles in Belfast, it was too contentious to have a Catholic population coming there. And so it closed down and wasn't used as a place of worship for a long time. And it has a sort of a couple of people living there in a guardianship. But yeah, this was a kind of opportunity to bring many more people to it. And even though this is quite a niche, quite odd project, it was a chance to sort of relook at these bigger public spaces and say, yeah, maybe these could and should be used for a place for gathering. yeah, these are some of the other locations we were in. This was a Temple of Peace which was a post-war memorial building in Cardiff, where the tolerances were very tight in the end when we had to install about 10 centimetres and an ice rink in Edinburgh. So yeah, varied sort of situations. This was kind of it in its biggest venue where it was all able to flex and have some space. Yeah. But yeah, I think throughout we were really sort of treading a fine line between wanting to design enough to set a tone for people. So it's a piece of sort of set design in a way, because really the main event is all happening behind your closed eyes. But also to create a space that felt familiar enough that people could trust the environment that they were in and didn't feel kind of really alienated. And that's really what all the discussions we're having. And we're actually now doing the next phase of this, which is going to tour around the world. And yeah, just that brings up a whole lot of other questions of what's familiar in different places and bringing in the right people to have those conversations with. Yeah, and I'm going to pass on now to Emily.
I'm going to talk a bit about, that's a really playful project in terms of design, and I'm going to talk a bit about play, but designing kind of more for play. So this is Baltic Street Adventure Playground. So a number of years ago, we set up Baltic Street Adventure Playground in the east end of Glasgow in Scotland. And the project's purpose was to give children of the area the opportunity to realise that they have an active agency in the world around them. This area of Glasgow is extremely deprived, and the project was a direct response to the lack of play space and out-of-school provision for children and families in this area. So this is kind of just a shot of what things looked like around there. So at the time, lots of things were being demolished for the Commonwealth Games. So large sports event like the Olympics, but just for the UK colonies, which is weird in and of itself. And it was being held in Glasgow. Dalmarnock was seen as a poor area and not really valued as an existing community where people lived, but a place that could be used to service the games. For example, entire estates were being demolished to make way for coach parking. So the playground was a public art commission for the legacy of the Commonwealth Games, who wanted a piece of public artwork to commemorate the Games. Interestingly, art commissions have been the thing that allows us to pull off these kinds of community-based projects, because a brief for what an artwork can be is by nature subjective and so hard to argue with. But the idea was to provide a permanent child-led space where children can play freely, which is free to access, and where children are free to come and go as they please. So some background to UK adventure playgrounds. The adventure playground movement grew out of the destruction of cities in the Second World War, when children would essentially play in bomb sites and build their own play apparatus from debris. And the idea behind adventure playgrounds is about the kind of intent for self-direction, the idea that calculated risk is a good thing, and that children learn from being allowed the agency to shape space around them, but also that they can generate confidence to not be daunted by their surroundings. So this is the site, which was a piece of land owned by the council, and actually apparently it had already been being used informally as a playground. So we didn't want the process of making a new playground to get in the way of this, because if the site suddenly became inaccessible, that would have been counterintuitive. So our approach was to continue to invite children to use the space and to work around them to facilitate what they were already doing, but also learn about what they wanted to do there. So this image shows how little formal structure they needed for playing. So, we were facilitators for these kinds of activities. We did simple things like provide wellies and waterproof clothing so they didn't get wet and cold. We gave them food so they didn't run out of energy. And then the actual play equipment that has developed throughout as being a collection of loose parts, things like tires, drainage pipes, supermarket trolleys, hay bales, and also things like crash mats and ropes, things that are movable. And then the fixed elements of the project were the basic functional amenities, like the office for the play workers, the toilets, and the storage. The main work in the project was setting up the infrastructure of the organisation so it could continue into the future. Part of that was employing the play workers, so setting it up as an organisation and getting trustees who would look after it in the long term. So this is Rob. He's one of the play workers who had been there from the beginning and is still there working with his brother Alan, who both live in the area, and they're really what keeps it going. So children were supported to self-organise and play workers to maintain a nurturing environment, which is constantly changing. And it goes on this way, empowering and giving agency to children to play in a way that feels free. The best thing about it is that it now has an independent life of its own and is embedded in the area. And another really positive thing to hear, a number of years later, is the positive response to the project. There's a motion in the Scottish Parliament recognising the great success of Baltic Street Playground. In the speech, they acknowledged how the staff have worked hard to develop training and guidance on the benefits and practicalities of free play, and how they've been proactive in sharing this with other child support services. And so, again, from an old project to a newer project, but with very similar principles, but with a different budget and scale. But we try to hold on to the same ideas. So this is a project that's as yet unbuilt, but we thought it'd be a good one to show. So this is a proposal for Bramcote Park, also in London. Baltic Street was was really important in how this one has come about. This is what the park looks like at the moment. It's been poorly maintained by the local council. You can see there's no swings on the swing frame. So at a glance, it's unremarkable. But the site actually, it has good bones. So it's surrounded by residential houses. It could be a new front garden to all these houses it's surrounded by. And this drawing illustrates the principles around which we designed the park. So one side is more of a public square with furniture to facilitate sports or community events. And the other side has more of a kind of canopy of trees for an abundance of vegetation and biodiversity. And similar to Baltic Street, it needed to have really effective kind of integration with the local community. And as our office was really near the park at the time, we could easily do things like make large models to take to consultations. So we would then be in the park with older kids, younger kids, adults, a kind of complex mix of older residents and mistrust of teenagers, and a complex history of racism in the area meant that community engagement was particularly important. We organised play events in the park to bring people's attention to the potential of what the space could be. So we kind of advertised the events with these big posters the weeks before, and these posters were also made by one of the tenants in our workspace who runs a graphic design company. So she is also somebody we know really well through the way that we work. So this is an image of one of the play events taking place in the park as is. You can notice the loose parts, and it highlights, the importance of play, but how local children really need a good space to do it. And the play events were kind of an offering to the local residents in return for their advice and opinions on what they thought would make this a successful park. And then another important thread of the project is reuse of materials. So we work with local works who are material reuse experts. And we also started the project with a material audit to kind of squeeze out of the site as much potential as we could. So we started categorizing what was there already by size, material condition, storage requirements, all really important. And we started the project. So it's, the main thing hasn't been built yet, but we started really near the beginning with a test piece, because we like making things, to indicate to the residents and to ourselves what our principles were going to be. So here are the existing swing barriers. And the idea was to make a notice board from the barriers and use the rubber on the ground for the pin board. And the barriers as the structure. And here is installed. So the notice board advertises the upcoming events in the park, more play days, gardening workshops, consultation events, the ethos of reuse and materials and local expertise, and listening to local user groups then bleeds into the final design of the park. And essentially, most of the objects and furniture in the park are going to be reuse of the existing. So felled trees from surrounding sites in London will become play structures. And we use all kinds of references for inspiration. And the reuse being a visible part of the narrative. Things like the existing goal will be lifted by the contractor out of the ground with its footings intact and replaced in its new position, repainted, and added with a new colourful netting and chestnut post additions. The chestnut post will provide a new barrier to the road and screwed into the goalposts. The old fenced game area is then removed, so the park as a whole is a lot more open. We were inspired this week by the chainmail curtain dividers at In Situ Studios Pickleball Complex. If you haven't been already, you should go. But for these bespoke objects, we then need to work out the connection detail from new to old, and we need to do this really well because there's all sorts of unglamorous stuff like warranties and careful detailing and getting the fabricators on side, and it's just really important that it works well and it looks good and is better than something that's off the shelf rather than a compromise. And there's all sorts of kind of hidden moments, like all the topsoil is being retained to create new topography, and the self-binding gravel paths are made from construction waste from the next door demolition site. That's us doing some tests. But one of the biggest successes is the trees. So this is actually an art installation called Fleeting Forest that we installed last Christmas in Granary Square in King's Cross, right in central London. And the brief for this project was commissioned by a very different client, the huge developer Argent. It was basically a temporary project to design a Christmas tree. And at the heart of the project for us is a provocation. So how can a temporary installation positively impact communities and environments in the long term? If we were going to take this on, we needed to sensitively gather and disperse materials, tweak the brief, and make the pot of money work a lot harder. So we proposed to Argent that with this money, we just buy lots of existing trees, we store them in King's Cross, and then once the Christmas period comes to an end, we plant them in Bramcote Park in Southwark, so that a small council-led project can benefit from a slightly performative installation and wastage is minimal. These trees are also wonky trees that are usually rejected by large public projects, but a bit like wonky veg, we got them for a good price. And we think it will be a beautiful project with reuse at the heart of it. Some of it not noticeable in the paths and the topsoil, and then some of it more visible in some of the kind of weird pieces of hybrid furniture. And so you can see that lots of our design projects are about play and working with children. And so a lot of this work is supported by our sister organisation, Assemble Play, who are specialists in this area. Assemble Play is an ongoing project, and it's a specialist, child-led, play work-supported project run by Penny Wilson and operating as part of Assemble high-quality, free-to-access play opportunities within homes, towns, and cities with the aim of building child-focused, playable thinking into our urban environments. Assemble Play's work is designed to improve the well-being and happiness of children and families by developing easily replicable situations. So Assemble Play are often employed to form part of our engagement sessions for design projects, like that of Bramcote Park, to engage local people in a meaningful way. And the play sessions, again, don't rely on fixed infrastructure, but use a series of loose parts. And this speaks to some of the ideas that were used in the creation of Baltic Street, and which things that can be anything that can be moved around, carried, rolled, lifted, piled on top of one another, or combined to create interesting structures and experiences. And these are all some of the photos by Jenny Ellen, a photographer that took the pictures in the last slides and works with Assemble Play. She's managed to capture children kind of completely immersed in play, and at times quite surreal climbing on street furniture. Interestingly, actions that you might otherwise only see in the event of a protest.
And rewinding again to 2008, talking about Otto Projects. Otto Projects is an auxiliary space for an existing experimental music venue called Cafe Otto in East London. And Cafe Otto itself, which is in an old Victorian building, it's quite a unique venue in London, and it's exclusively foregrounds experimental music. So it's best known for free improvisation and free jazz, but has a program of expansive genres. This is a photo of Sun Ra's orchestra. The Cafe Otto project began in 2008, again during the financial crash, when Keiko Yamamoto and Hamish Dunbar, along with a community of artists, took on an old print works in Dalston, which is East London, with a loan from the council. So that's really, you don't get loans from the council anymore. But it was grown into a fully independent, community-minded space, which is supported by volunteers who are involved in its development. But the Otto Projects building was, the sort of auxiliary space, as I said, and this was created by Assemble in 2013, which was just around the corner from the main venue in an abandoned lot. And this project offers a free rehearsal space for local musicians and hosts workshops, talks, screenings, and installations relating to the core program at Cafe Otto. And like the main venue and its program, the space is no frills, it's direct, and it allows for intimate performances. And it's essentially because it's one single room that audiences and the musicians enter into directly from the street. So there's no green room and no stage. So this was the disused council-owned site where the project was to happen. And the original deal was that the space could be occupied on a temporary basis because they didn't have the funds to develop it. We thought that this context and these conditions set a very rich and fervent context to respond to architecturally, especially the fact it's temporary. I think it was a challenge. Just because something needs to be temporary and cost efficient doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be flimsy and lightweight. So there was all this existing rubble on the site, and there wasn't much money, and the construction method of Otto Projects was based on using the resources of what was already there. So we wanted to use the rubble. So the earth, rubble, and gravel on the otherwise empty site was gathered, sieved, bagged, and compressed. So transforming this waste into giant, heavy building blocks. We made deep walls and buttresses from stacking the rubble bags on top of one another, essentially tidying up the site. And I guess similarly to Cineroleum, the structure relied on lots of volunteers, and that's really a testament to the client, who had built a really solid community of people who really were invested in their organisation already and saw it as it had communal value for their area. So the rubble walls were also then finished with a decorative rubble dash render, and then topped with a very lightweight timber trussed roof. And the internal walls left the rubble bag texture exposed. And I guess this is just showing the process and showing that the experimental idea, and was quite fitting to the program of experimental music. And so interestingly, this building is still there. And it was a temporary venue that was built on a short time span. and the space is still running. Despite continual pressure from development, it somehow still exists. And this is really rare for community art space to hold space like that in a really gentrified and highly desirable area of London, where real estate value is so competitive and residential development is the driving force of the city. And there's a sense that the fact that this building has a physical weight and is tied to the site, it could maybe be part of its staying power, which is almost completely opposite to what Emily was just talking about in Fleeting Forest, where that kind of ease of movement was really designed in from the beginning. This is really about clinging on. And it's a kind of, maybe that could be some sort of architectural strategy. But yeah, and then I guess this is a completely different scale and budget and opportunity. But this is I'm now going to talk about another rubble project, which is Luma Atelier. And this is in 2019. Assemble and a Belgian practice called BC Architects were commissioned by the Luma Foundation in Arles in the south of France to renovate a former 19th century train depot. And this is on a huge site, which is a gallery site, essentially. And it's run by the Luma Foundation, and it has lots of different galleries on it, including a Frank Gehry Tower contemporary gallery. But yeah, all these old train depot carriages. But the project was to provide a new workspace for Atelier Luma, who are a material research lab. And that lab their purpose is to develop material solutions for a more sustainable production process. And these materials range from finishes and paints, but also construction materials. And they're really focused on looking at the local area and the byproducts of agriculture and the land around them to create low impact and locally based bioregional methods of construction. And this is something that happens quite a lot in sort of niche private house project, like individual house projects, but to have an opportunity to do a project with these methods at such a scale that was going to be public facing and commissioned by a wealthy organization, so it could was kind of an opportunity to be this public-facing prototype to prove some of these more experimental building methods. And so as well as a kind of a sort of more academic opportunity to be a prototype for an idea of building, it also needed to provide workspaces dedicated to laboratories, meeting rooms, desk, production space, a library, a resource centre. But yeah, so together with BC Architects, we built on Atelier Luma's existing bioconstruction research and material research to use the materials of the Camargue region as a palette for intervention and retrofit. So this is a one-to-one prototype happening on the site that was exploring the use of rice straw bale as an insulation material for the existing stone walls. And from the outset, the design and construction process was understood as an opportunity for learning, which, came from having enough support from the client to be able to do this, which was lucky. So there were 3 principles declared at the start of the project: that the building should be a site of experimentation, a place for learning, and a building that accommodates change. I guess during construction, the building site itself was to host discussions and construction demonstrations and training programs and invite students and builders and architects to be part of on-site residencies. And this is a way that Assemble quite often try and approach new work, is to make sure that you spend time in the place that you're designing for. And also that because there was this large space, there was an opportunity to make large-scale one-to-one prototypes that could be used as tools of communication and also to prove these quite experimental ways of building. But this way of working is really, it's a worthwhile way of communicating an intent. Yeah, and also I guess part of this project was also to prove some of these methods of construction so they could fit building regulations and that the building could be insurable. But yeah, so some of the finishes were made from algae, salt, bioplastics, the earth, and an indigo oil that was mixed from the region that was used to stain the timber structure, both sealing it and celebrating it. And the walls and partitions were produced from waste materials, waste earth, minerals, and agricultural products. Stone dust from the limestone quarries was mixed, so that's a kind of byproduct of stone cutting. So there's lots of dust from these places, but that's mixed into the rammed earth and natural plasters to reflect the surrounding landscape. This is the main hall. It's a large, hard surface space, and acoustics were really important in a lot of these kind of open plan spaces. And the acoustics were created by using sunflower fibers from sunflower stems, so making that into a kind of a fiber that you can mix into a clay, and that was either sprayed onto the walls or pressed into sheet panels with a large heat press. And I've just been to Dix Park and seen all those sunflowers, so maybe that's a source of construction material to be tapped into. And this is a map of where all the materials came from for the building. And then I guess some of the methods of construction wouldn't have come about unless if they'd been fixed before being on site and working with the people who were making it. So the terrazzo floor was made from the existing clay roof tiles that had been broken down from all the roof renovations and then meticulously sliced and laid. And this was a proposition that came from the contractor who had the idea, and that we loved the idea. So kind of just being open to also the expertise and eyes of everyone who is working there and knows their material and their craft really well. But yeah, I think like the atelier had the feeling of being quite a pivotal project in the sense of the kind of reach that these weird methods of building had with a big commercial client, and also that it sat next to a Frank Gehry building. Like it's a sort of farmy vibe. And of course, I mean that's kind of a rare project or client to come across, but there are people doing these kinds of approaches in a much more systematized way, which, we're working on a few projects at the moment where we're using prefabricated straw cassettes, and these are by a company called EcoCocon, and it essentially means it's the structure and the insulation in one, and it's a natural material, and I think we're always interested in being able to do these more sustainable ways of building, but within the realities of economic constraints. So this to us is maybe more exciting, that things can work in reality for more people. But yeah, I think this is just this is a concept drawing that we made for a very slow burn pitch, which is for a community-led development in southwest of England. But it essentially shows a landscape work in progress, from harvesting crops to dismantling a building to making bioconstruction blocks to a car boot sale. It's a circular economy. And as a practice, we explore the issue of sustainable design in different ways, but often and more in favor of reuse and retention of existing structures, and when there isn't structure, using the granular material and filling in those existing structures. And just that we make drawings like this because we want to communicate the process and keep this idea visible and possible seeming, that you can change the world around you. Yeah.
And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Assemble for that incredible and inspiring talk. And thank you for coming such a long way to explore our little city for a few days. I know we're all really excited that you're here. Thank you to Ratio Design as well for being our lecture sponsor for the evening. We're going to open the floor up to some questions, so just raise your hand and I'll hand you the mic.
Hello. The Meanwhile sites, the way that you guys, it sounds to me a site that you don't really know how long you're going to be able to use. Some of your investments seemed quite high to me, you know, like there's some big structures. Do those then get recycled? Is there a process for like how those have a second life or move on to another space? I just, maybe I want to know a little bit more about that, because it did seem like there's some time and materials that went into those. Was there some sort of timeline, as though we know we're going to have it for a year, we might have it for 2 years? Like what enabled you to say, okay, we're going to invest in this and we're going to do something semi-substantial in my mind, you know?
Am I okay to answer? Yeah, I mean, it varies from different projects. So I guess for Yard House, which was the big building with the colourful tiles that got taken down, often with meanwhile use spaces, you get a kind of a certain amount of years guaranteed in your lease, so like 5 years, and then after that, you may have to leave, or you may get another few years, but it's a bit unpredictable. So we kind of have that timeline, that sort of timeline in our heads. We take a certain amount of risk, but also for Yard House, for example, that was built to be taken down. So that was all the tiles are taken off, the frame was deconstructed, and it was actually sold to a high net worth individual, and has. With the idea that then it was going to be rebuilt on his land, but sadly it never has been. But it still exists as a thing that can be built. It's not been destroyed. But then some of the other projects, I think we kind of touched on it. We've had different approaches. So the Otto Projects one is a really interesting one. That was about taking a risk, knowing that we were building something that was supposed to be really temporary and building something really heavy with the idea that maybe it would stay, because we didn't believe that it should be as temporary as we were told it should be. So that, you know, that was a kind of a risk that we took that has, I guess, paid off.
And then Dream Machine, which was the big one, the big blue one, that is in storage, and that has been designed to last, to be a flat pack. So, and the client had more than just that year summer in mind. That is, we're going to reuse those pieces essentially.
And then the final thing I would say is in terms of our workspace and investing time and money into building something where we might have to take it all down and move is actually a really stressful part of how we operate, and ideally we wouldn't operate like that. We would love to not have to move every 5 years. We're looking for a permanent home, and we would love to have the opportunity to stay somewhere for longer, because it's a chaotic way of operating, and it's within a system that actually we would like to be a bit different. And that's come out of necessity rather than wanting to do it like that.
And I think the attitude is also that you can't wait for it all to be perfect. Like, people need to be making things in their studios, and children need to play. Like, their childhoods are so short, and so you don't wait for the perfect scenarios and the right politics and the right decisions to be made at a larger scale, you make it work now. And actually it can still be really fun, and it brings other benefits, like the kind of rough and ready, the fact that we've never invested in our we haven't been able to invest enough in our workspaces for them, everything to be finished and perfect, also allows maybe more kind of messy work to happen in those spaces, which is fruitful. It's stressful, but we keep doing it.
Thanks for a great talk. It was even better than I imagined. So that's awesome. And we've enjoyed spending the last several days with you. I think someone said it, but they've been here since Saturday, and they've been to Bojangles and the Whirligig Park and all kinds of things. And so thanks for coming and making a deep dive into our space here. I want to ask kind of a personal question. I think one of the things that is, there are a lot of things wrong with our country right now, as I think the whole world knows. But one of the things that is frustrating is how expedient and predetermined and pragmatic the transition from childhood to a career has become in this country. And I think we've lost the role of education as being a time of discovery and freedom and kind of figuring out what you want to do. And I see a lot of freedom in your work and investigation in your work. And so if you don't mind a personal question, and I think especially for the young people in the room, I'm too old to learn much from what you're going to say. I just wonder where you're from, what experiences you had that have led you to do the type of work you do today, and most importantly, just a little bit about your education and how it's enabled you to do what you do.
Let me have a small think. Where am I from? Well, I'm from London. Grew up in London. Had a kind of normal kind of architectural education, went to architecture school, had the sort of parents who, I probably wanted to go to art school, and had the sort of parents who were like, you should go to architecture school. I guess I'm very middle class. I think I joined Assemble about 7 years ago, and when there was the things like the Cineroleum project happening, I was in architecture school, and it seemed like these were guys who were doing something like quite different to everybody else, and so then it just felt like a really, really exciting thing to want to join in on. And I think what Assemble's quite good at is, which I think the architecture profession can sometimes do, is not being kind of snobby, and having lots of parties and lots of events that lots of people from architecture school or the local area would come to, and it was quite easy to know what was going on and get involved. And I think that was a kind of very, very appealing thing about the practice. And also, I think, I'm quite a kind of like architecture-y person within the office, but there's other people who didn't study architecture, there's people who come from a more construction background, there's people who studied English at university, for example. So there's actually a real range of voices, which can make decision-making really difficult, but I think it means that the work doesn't form one thing too easily, and I think that's what keeps the joy in some of the stuff. I mean, yeah, that was a bit of a roundabout answer, but I hope that's,
Yeah, I'm also from London, and I guess I had arty parents who, I think also I said I wanted to go to art school, and they said maybe you should do architecture because our lives have been stressful. But yeah, I would say that is a privilege in itself, having people telling you that you can do these things. And none of my peers at school went to do architecture. I think I sort of knew about it as a thing to do because I had access to people saying like, oh, I know this person who's an architect, and all that stuff is a privilege. And there are, I think one of the things that we do at Assemble is like try and do work experience things that Emily runs actually, and that's like trying to do outreach to local schools and let them know that architecture is an option or art is an option, and that architecture doesn't have to be a certain thing. It can be more than one way of looking at things. Yeah, and I think like the reason I joined Assemble was because it wasn't just straight architecture. I didn't really want to go and do just architecture, and I think there is a kind of, if there can be, I did all humanities subjects at school. I did English, history, art, and that's what I understood of what architecture could be about. And I think I've sort of found a place that thinks about it in quite a sociological way. But yeah, I think, I also think there's like a long way to go for the industry to be more accessible to more people, and it's important that it does, because it needs to reflect more people. Yeah.
And I would also say that I think as an office, we're quite aware of the fact that, we're young, but we're getting older, and we don't pay ourselves that much because we do quite risky projects, so we can't. And I think as we grow up, that's going to become more and more of an issue, and we need to, people have started having children, and when that happens, you want more stability, and I think it's an ongoing conversation as to then what we compromise on, whether we start doing a few more conventional projects that allow the practice to survive, or whether Assemble is actually an office for taking risks, and actually if you don't want to do that anymore, then you move on and allow somebody else to join. So that's ongoing. That's an ongoing conversation.
Hi. One thing that I noticed is like a common thread across the projects that you described today is less about like a focus on less about the historicity of site, but of the sited community, and that like the research methodology, I guess, that you're using to sort of unpack what the community is about is about having the community sort of work with you in the space of design and building of the space. And I guess I'm kind of wondering like how much of the community is in these designs, and how much of your studio is in the designs. And I don't know, I guess I'm really interested in that as sort of as a research methodology. If you could just speak a little more to that, I guess.
I think there's always an intention to, that we always try and find space in a project program to bring in voices either from stakeholders on the project, and that includes people who might use the building, and like more people within our collective. But I think part of what, as you're saying, this sort of combination of what we're bringing and what other people are bringing, I think through a process of doing that quite a lot in different situations, I think what I understand is it's always good to bring something as a conversation starter and not just leave an empty space for people to fill in. And I think hand drawing is always quite good for that, and because you can do a sketch, but then that's something that can be sort of projected onto. It's not a finished, complete design. It's like, here's an idea. And someone might look at that and see their own version of something completely different, and you can start a kind of visual conversation in that way. And I also, and I think there's sometimes, what I've also noticed in architecture in various different places I've been working in or other situations, is that sometimes it can be like, oh, the generous thing is to be bland and not express what you think could be good. And I think that's what Assemble don't try and do that. I think it's like propose what you think could be good and be very open to it being changed. Like you can like it for the moment, but then be really open to someone not liking it or someone wanting to do something completely different, and it being like this sort of flexible, keeping it open for longer, the process, I think, and not fixing what something's going to be like early. But yeah, still being propositional and raising your voice. And I think there's a lot of people in Assemble, and it's like quite, I think the biggest thing is, I think it's really good that people do feel confident to say what they think, and that's probably the hardest thing to get used to doing. But actually, yeah, if you can feel, yes, I think out of a lot of spaces, I think people do feel emboldened to say what they think in that situation. And we try, and I guess because that's an internal way of operating, that's also what we bring to external workshops. So we're used to a culture of like wanting to get other people's viewpoints, and
Yeah, I mean, I think Mary answered. I guess we talk a lot about talking to people and getting everyone's ideas, but also essentially we like designing things. We like making stuff. We've got workshop. We like colours. We like materials. We like textures, and I think we've got a really strong sense of. But a few people who like things a bit differently. So it's a combination of all those things.
Hey, when you first started your firm, did you have the idea of this workshop and me starting this work, or did you grow into this pretty extensive workshop experience?
I don't think there was any art to be, so Emily and I weren't there right at the beginning, but it was started by a group of friends, and there wasn't an intention of like, we're going to set out and have a company and have a workshop, and we're going to have our 5-year plan. It was started on a project, just because wanted to do something, and I think it's, the story is it's been grown organically from that, but process-led. So you do a project and you realize you want to make things, and you're like, oh, wouldn't it be good if we had a workshop? And then there's an opportunity, or you meet someone, and I think it's all been kind of through needs and necessity, and then realizing those things work really well, and can you make that more, and basically.
And then some people get fed up and they leave, and then some other people join and then say, oh, well, let's do it like this, and let's form an LLP, because then we'll be able to get insured to do this, and we can get some loans from here. And then there's another argument, and somebody else leaves and somebody else joins, and it grows from there. Yeah.
I found it super interesting that you said you engaged neuroscientists for that dream project. Is that something you aim to do when you're doing all of your projects, is to engage people who are completely outside of the architecture and design practice? And if so, is that something that you think is really beneficial to you guys?
I think there is a general interest in just getting experts, like working in a way where you're the person who does what you're doing, and you work with someone who does what they're doing, and then it's like when you come together, something completely different comes out of, and you wouldn't have that design without their input. It would be a very different thing without that lens of it. It was interesting working with the neuroscientists, because it did kind of just have an impact on the methodology of how we did the design work. It was kind of like there was a big focus on no bias, and I guess like a lot of like a lot of things that we were trying to choose and make decisions about are things like color and a feeling and references, and that is all quite subjective, but it was a really interesting discipline to have to kind of like basically, I mean, it's doing options. It's like you do this option, this option, this option, this option, this option, and you like show them all without trying to put bias on something, and then throw it to the floor. And like, then there's always a bit of like, then you have your argument. And I think that there was a bit of a tension there, but it was good. It's like we couldn't make decisions without sort of showing that we'd explored all these different versions, and it sort of did feel quite scientific in a way, and quite a kind of quite refreshing way, actually. Yeah, and I guess they were being neuroscientists about something that was about individual human perception, about something you couldn't see. So there was this quite big blur between what we were all doing, and it was sort of nice to see the similarities.
I mean, yeah, I can't talk about the scientists, but we try to get people in most weeks to kind of talk about something, and we try not to get architects. And yeah, I think working with experts is quite one of our favorite things to do. So people like material scientists who can really say, what's going to work and what's not, and then we can then bring things together is a kind of really important way in which we work. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hello. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I guess my question was, how do you see yourselves working in spaces that others might see subversive, or essentially like when you're doing something somewhere or in some place where others might not see the vision of what you're trying to accomplish?
That just made me think of a visit that happened recently on another project. It's a project that's happening at the moment, and it's for a big gallery which is going to be in Brussels, and we've been commissioned to design a playground within this gallery. And the whole project is a big project, and it's going to go on the canal in Brussels, which is right next to a very underprovided for neighborhood, kind of low-income families who I think are pretty isolated from the program of this big gallery. And this big gallery is inevitably going to bring lots of gentrification to this area. And we were invited to go and do some workshops to facilitate the design for this playground, because the intention for the playground is, from the client, is that it is a public space and is something that will be inviting to this community who would otherwise maybe not come to this gallery, and they really want the gallery to seem open. And I guess that whole experience was very eye-opening, because we were coming from London. We didn't know the details of this community and what to expect, but I think we did expect the gallery to be kind of more in touch with that than we had expected. But I guess we did bring with us on these workshops a series of play workers from Assemble Play, which Emily spoke about. And it was important that we brought one of the play workers who could speak Arabic, because we were aware that it turned out none of the people working in the gallery were able to speak Arabic, which was the main language in this area, and that we were going to be going to a local playground and basically doing an Assemble Play session in this place without much context. And the whole point was to try and get feedback from parents and just talk to them, introduce the idea. Just by having Zareen there, who was able to communicate with the families. Just meant we got feedback about our proposal and the gallery that we just wouldn't have had otherwise. And like, even like, as you know, Assemble have, we have a joy from aesthetics that are kind of like quite rough and ready, and like, you know, spoken about rubble today and cheap, readily available materials. And I think like we hadn't really thought about what bringing those materials to that area of people who didn't know the context of this kind of art organization and subversive sort of things that you might think. And some of the feedback that we got from that session was like, oh, why are you bringing these materials to our park as this like, and it was upsetting, it was shocking, but it was also conversations that were able to be held by the right person being there, and then for those conversations to be brought directly to the client. And even though it was actually quite uncomfortable, but it just felt like, okay, what's the point in doing this kind of thing unless you're having those conversations and being like aware of your misgivings of like not knowing, basically. So I think just trying to like think ahead of the things, your blind spots, and like acknowledge if you're aware of things that you just don't really know, bringing in the right people and making sure those people are in the room. And there was just an interesting another outcome that came of that, of like then the play worker who had managed to have that feedback, I mean, it also is probably quite a lot of pressure on her, but like she was then talking about, because her kind of own lived experience of being in London and lots of areas that then also got gentrified, and and then just that it then kind of also emboldened other people who were kind of maybe more junior in the gallery staff to also talk about their experiences. And I mean, maybe that all seems a bit kind of random and lucky, but at the same time, it's like you can learn from that and then maybe make that more intentional the next time you do outreach. So yeah, that was a really kind of interesting experience for me of learning, essentially. Yeah, thanks for that though, good question.
Can we get another round of applause for Emily and Mary? Thank you all for coming tonight. We're gonna wrap this evening up now, but make sure to stay tuned for tomorrow. We're gonna wrap up the week with an exciting end. NC Noma is gonna be hosting a reception with a lot of delicious Southern food, and House of Swank is coming to live screen print Real Matter 25 t-shirts. So have a good night and come back tomorrow.